get through this. We've put in place a 3-point economic plan. It supports business owners, including through new loans, while helping those who no longer have a paycheck through the CERB, and protecting jobs with the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. I know many of you are anxious to see this subsidy delivered. We're calling on the opposition to join us in bringing the House back to pass legislation so you can get the support you need as soon as possible. Cabinet will be meeting this afternoon. As usual, most Cabinet members will be on the phone, and I will be attending this one in person to discuss next steps.
Ever since we've announced the wage subsidy, we've had many conversations with business owners, unions, and workers. I would like to thank them for their advice and their perspectives. These conversations have helped us to adapt what was announced to include a greater number of businesses and to help out more people. And this is what I would like to speak to today. We had said that businesses had to demonstrate that their revenue had gone down by 30% this month compared to the prior year in order to receive the subsidy. We recognize that for charitable organizations and startups and new businesses, this can create a problem. So we are going to be more flexible. Businesses will be able to show a reduction of 15% of the revenue for March rather than 30% in order to take into account the fact that, generally speaking, the pandemic had an impact on their activities as of mid-March. Businesses also will be able to choose to use January and February as a reference period to show that there was a loss of revenue. As for charitable organizations and NGOs, we know that you have different challenges with regards to funding. For this reason, you will have the choice. You can include or exclude government subsidies when you calculate your loss of revenue. If your business has been affected by COVID-19, the government will give you up to $847 a week for each employee. And, as was announced, this subsidy will be retroactive to March 15th.
Since we announced the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, we've had a number of conversations with stakeholders and workers who've provided us with valuable feedback and helped us refine what we'd put forward. I want to thank them for their input. We want to make these emergency measures as effective and inclusive as we can, so we're listening and making adjustments along the way. We previously announced that to qualify for the subsidy, businesses would have to show a 30% drop in revenues when comparing the month this year to the month the previous year. We recognize that this could be an issue for nonprofits, fast-growing companies like startups, and new businesses. So we're going to put in place more flexible rules. Companies will now have the option of using January and February of this year as reference points to show a 30% loss. And businesses will only need to show a 15% decline in revenue for March instead of 30%, because most of us only felt the impact of COVID-19 about halfway through the month. We understand that charities and nonprofits are experiencing different types of pressures when it comes to funding. For this reason, they will have the choice to include or exclude government funding when calculating loss in revenue. If your company or organization has been impacted by COVID-19, the government will give you up to $847 a week per employee. And as we've said before, this subsidy will be retroactive to March 15th. Our government understands that not all businesses operate the same way, and that's why we're making changes to include as many of you as possible. We will keep listening, but we really hope you will use this help from your country and from your fellow citizens to rehire and pay your workers. If our economy is to get through this, we need businesses to survive and workers to get paid. Job numbers for March will be out tomorrow. It's going to be a hard day for the country. We're facing a unique challenge, but I know that if we pull together, our economy will come roaring back after this crisis. Au cours des dernières semaines, on a instauré des
Over the past few weeks, we've implemented unprecedented measures. The emergency wage subsidy and the Canada Emergency Response Benefit to help out workers, businesses, and families. This being said, some people are not eligible to these benefits and others need more support. I'm thinking, for example, of freelancers, of home care workers, and those who have seen reduced a reduction of work hours to 10 hours or less. We're working on solutions and we will provide help. Our seniors are also going through hard times because they are particularly vulnerable in the face of COVID-19. They're also concerned of the impact on their savings. We will have extra measures to help out our most vulnerable seniors very soon. As for students, there are students who are getting ready to find a job, and we will have several measures to support you as well. This morning, we're going to begin with the first step.
Small businesses affected by COVID-19, we're making changes to the Canada Summer Jobs program this year. We will now give CSJ employers a subsidy of up to 100% to cover the costs of hiring students. We will also extend the time frame for job placement until the winter because we know that some jobs will start later than usual. And because many businesses have had to scale back their operations, they will be able to hire students part-time. Our government is also encouraging all employers who have been impacted by COVID-19 to make adjustments so work can continue. For example, if you run a local food bank, you may be doing deliveries instead of serving people on site, so you could hire students to help you. We will also be asking MPs across the country to reach out to businesses and organizations providing critical services in their communities to look at how students can help during this critical time. In this economic climate, it's hard for people of all ages to find work, but young people are especially vulnerable. They're new to the workforce, so they don't have a lot of money set aside for this kind of situation. At the same time, they need work experience to secure their next job and money to cover their living expenses and help with tuition for the rest of the year. Today, we're taking a step in the right direction to help young people find work during this difficult time, but I want to be clear, we will be doing more. Just like we will do more for those who need help but are not eligible to receive the benefits we've announced so far. We're also working around the clock to ensure that our frontline workers have everything they need to save lives and stay safe. Overnight, we received 500,000 N95 masks from 3M, and they'll be distributed across the country where they are most needed. I know the past weeks haven't been easy, but we're going to get through this together if everyone keeps following the instructions from public health experts. So please, stay home as much as possible. Only go out for essential things like groceries and medications, and try to make that trip once a week or less. And when you do, remember to keep 2 meters from those around you. That's the best way to stay healthy and protect our frontline workers who are doing so much to help all of us. Encore une fois, merci d'être avec nous ce matin.
Once again, thank you for coming this morning. I will now answer questions.
One follow-up. Over to you, operator.
Merci, thank you. The first question is from Heather Schofield from the Toronto Star. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Could you talk to us about what your plan is to get people back to work efficiently and safely without provoking another outbreak?
What we're seeing around the world is countries are beginning, as we see social distancing measures, as we see people staying home in countries around the world, are now looking at the steps needed to think about easing those social distancing rules to start our economies rolling again. It is very obvious that we need to be very, very careful that all the work we've done over these past weeks and in the coming weeks at staying home, at following the instructions of our public health officials, doesn't become for naught when suddenly spikes happen as we get back to work. So it's going to be very, very important to do it in a measured, graduated way that allows for economic activity to begin while preventing severe spikes in COVID transmission. There is a lot of reflections ongoing on that, but as we know, the current measures will be in place for many more weeks, so we have time to get that right and to look what other countries that might be earlier in their phase do that is successful or less.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, it seems that we do have some time to think about it, but there's also, how do you assess the risk of summertime? I mean, we've been cooped up already for 4 weeks, and people are doing it voluntarily, and as you say, working very well together. But what's the risk of that falling apart as the summertime comes and the good weather is there and people are, in desperate need of some earnings as well?
We will be talking about modeling in the coming days and what various scenarios are, but what is very, very clear is in order to avoid spiking cases, in order to avoid having to stay in reduced economic activity modes for months and months and months and months and months, we need to keep very, very strong in the measures we have now. That is how we get to the best case scenario. And quite frankly, the social distancing and the staying home that Canadians are doing now is exactly the right kinds of things that we need in order to look at the most optimistic models. There is no question that once we start to get to the other side of this spike and are able to talk about easing off social distancing, there will be a need for continual surveillance, continual attentiveness on testing, on contact tracing, on protecting our most vulnerable. That means even as things are able to start getting back to normal, they won't be back to normal. And calibrating that right and understanding that what people are doing now is essential, what they will continue doing now is just as, in the coming weeks, is just as essential, but how we ease off and continue to follow the best directions and instructions of our public health officials will be how we manage to get through this in the best possible way.
We recognize that it's very difficult to stay in isolation, to stay home during this period of time. And we know that we are going to have to continue doing this for several weeks to come. But to have the best opportunity of getting out of this as soon as possible, we have to continue with these measures that keep us safe. At some point, in a few months, most likely, when we will be looking at easing up on these measures to a certain extent, we will still have to be very vigilant with regards to our behavior as to who can return to work, to make sure that we're not facing a new spiking of cases, or even worse, that we undo all the work that we've done over these past few weeks and that we find ourselves with a huge number of cases in the country. We are following this closely. We're trying to see how we can go to the next phase. But right now, we are very, very entrenched in this current phase. It means that we're going to stay at home as much as possible. We're going to continue keeping social distance measures in place.
Merci, thank you. The next question is from Althea Raj, HuffPost Canada. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you explain why the government chose not to make relief payments simple, inclusive, and universal? You know, we're hearing from a lot of people who are excluded from the measures that you've announced, including the ones this week for a variety of reasons. Now, one of your MPs is telling people who have some income not to take the attestation for the Canada Emergency Relief Benefit so literally. There's another expert telling self-employed workers not to invoice for 14 days in order to qualify, which to me sounds pretty unethical. Why did you decide against, for example, sending $2,000 payments to all Canadians and to claw them back from those who don't need them next year?
We recognize that we needed to do things quickly, and we needed to do things robustly in a way that would allow our extraordinary public servants at Canada Revenue Agency and elsewhere to be able to put in a system that would reach the largest number of Canadians who needed it as possible. We looked at many different designs, and we even iterated in the designs that we put forward, but we established that the Canada Emergency Response Benefit was a way of replacing income to the largest number of people who suddenly found themselves without a paycheck, and that the wage subsidy at 75% was going to be able to keep people connected to their jobs and ensure that businesses continued to exist so that they can come back quickly afterwards. We recognize that any time you put out large measures quickly and in a way that is solid enough to be certain that it's going to work through the machine, there are going to be gaps. And what we've talked about over these past days is ways of filling those gaps and making sure that more people who are in exceptional or different circumstances are able to access the help we need. And we will continue to have more to say on that in the coming days. Okay. Quand nous voulons aider le plus grand nombre de gens possible, le plus rapidement possible.
We're trying to help the greatest amount of people as quickly as possible, so it is necessary to take very broad measures and to have very robust systems in place. We need to be able to deliver these benefits to a large number of people as quickly as possible. This is a system that was not created to do that, not on such a large scale and at this speed. So these are choices that we've had to make with regards to the benefit, with regards also to the wage subsidy. We recognize that there are some people, even if millions of people will receive the benefits, there are some people who will not be eligible. That is why we are constantly looking at these exceptions to try to find means to provide the necessary assistance. We recognize that it's impossible to have a perfect system in this type of unprecedented situation. We're not aiming for perfection. We're trying to help as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, and that's why we're always making new announcements to try to add new people.
Widest number of people to make this as broad as possible, and you're defending it by saying that you needed to have big, bold action. Wouldn't the big, bold action be to send everybody help as opposed to rolling out week by week new changes, revised versions of programs in order to fix the gaps that apparently are just coming to the government's attention? That way you wouldn't have people who maybe, 6, 7, 8 weeks without any income at all?
We knew from the very beginning that we had to make a choice, whether we get big programs out quickly to as many people as possible, or else we figure out how to refine them and get the right things to people. We made it a double process, a two-program process writ large, where yes, millions of Canadians will receive the $2,000 every month with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. But we also know that there are many Canadians who are middle class, for whom $2,000 a month might not be even nearly enough to cover their needs right now because of various costs, because of various issues that they're facing, which is why we wanted to bring in a 75% wage subsidy that will give them, instead of just $500 a week, up to $847 a week. That is more generous for people who need it, but it is still a significant pay cut for everyone. We understand this is a situation that is difficult for everyone. We modeled ourselves these programs on a collection of programs that worked in different ways in different countries, and we're confident that we came up with the right measures to help most Canadians. But as I said, there are people we recognize need particular help or don't quite fall into those categories, and that's very much what we're working on now, and have been announcing over the past few days in terms of measures that we're bringing in for people who work less than 10 hours a week, for example, who will still qualify for the CERB. These are the kinds of things we're continuing to work on.
Thank you. Next question, operator.
Thank you, merci. La prochaine question est d'Émilie Bergeron de l'agence QMI. Votre ligne est ouverte. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Hello, Mr. Trudeau. With regards to the wage subsidy, you're talking about a 3 to 6 week waiting period, and this doesn't seem to have changed. Many businesses find that this is too long to wait. What do you have to say to them? We are working extremely hard to try to shorten these delays. We are aiming for 3 weeks. We hope that we'll be able to provide the money in 3 weeks. Of course, we have civil servants that are working tirelessly to deliver the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Today, we've seen millions of Canadians who are receiving the benefit. This has been unprecedented work done by people who are facing the same pandemic, and they're working for their community, and they have been able to pull out all stops to deliver this benefit. And now they're looking at the wage subsidy. We're trying to aim a 3-week delivery period, maybe earlier if things go well. But we understand that all of these are new. We've never done these. We've never had to do these types of things, so we hope to be able to deliver soon.
This is a significant task, but we know that businesses who are making decisions to rehire are stretched thin and need to know that money is going to come in soon from the government. That's why we are aiming for 3 weeks in terms of landing the wage subsidy, getting it to Canadian businesses. It will require continued Herculean efforts by our public servants, particularly the Canada Revenue Agency, who have done extraordinary work over these past weeks to deliver the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. And as we've seen, millions of Canadians are beginning to receive that as of today. This was an unbelievable effort by people who, quite frankly, are facing the same challenges, the same pandemic, the same family issues and worries that the rest of us are facing, but stayed focused on delivering help for Canadians because this was so important at this time. And now they are going to turn their energies and efforts towards delivering the wage subsidy, which, as I said, we hope to see within the next 3 weeks. But that is something that we're going to continue working on extremely hard. And that's one of the reasons why we are so eager to see Parliament pass the legislation necessary. And I'm certainly hoping that the opposition parties will join me in moving quickly to get this through so we can get help to Canadians.
And Suivi?
Justement, par rapport au retour du Parlement.
With regards to the return to the House of Commons, you said that this wage subsidy needed to be passed in the House. What's being said with the opposition parties with regards to this temporary return to Parliament? We're speaking about measures. This is a measure that will be the largest measure in the history of the Government of Canada. We need to have the involvement of the opposition parties in order to pass this legislation. It's also required to study the legislation and to make sure that this is the correct way to help Canadians. If they have questions, of course they have questions, and we're working with them. We hope to work collaboratively with the other parties. In the end, this is help to Canadians. Everyone is in agreement that we have to provide help, and we're working together to find the best way to do this.
We recognize that these measures are the largest measures passed in decades, if not ever, by a Canadian government. That's why our democratic institutions and their democratic processes, including parliamentary oversight, is extremely important. That's why we're working with opposition parties to ensure that this legislation gets passed quickly but properly so that we can get this help to Canadians in the best possible way.
Thank you. One more call, please, operator.
Next question is from Brett Forrester, APTN. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Prime Minister. With various First Nations calling for military assistance, at what point does the military agree to go help? Is it number of cases? Is it deaths? Is it per capita? What's the threshold for answering some of these calls for help?
Obviously, we are very concerned with the situation in First Nations communities across the country. Indigenous communities in general, particularly remote and northern ones, are more vulnerable because they often have difficult circumstances, including difficulty around healthcare. So we recognize that is something we need to focus on. Decisions on how to best help, first of all, we've already allocated millions of dollars to community support programs in Indigenous communities. As for further assistance or military assistance, that will always be made on a case-by-case basis, depending on the individual circumstances and how we can best help as a government. That is what we're always going to be looking at.
And a follow-up?
Yep, thank you. As a follow-up, we know, as you say, these communities really are petri dishes. And for example, Yabamatong and the Anishinaabe Nation Grand Chief have been asking for other resources in lieu of military aid. What's your response to some of their calls to action?
My response to Grand Chief Fiddler and others is really to make sure that yes, we're there and we want to help. I know Minister Miller and others have been engaging directly with leadership across Canada to ensure that what is needed is worked on together. We recognize the particular and in some cases significant needs in many cases, significant needs of Indigenous communities, and that is something that we are working on together.
We recognize that our Indigenous communities are vulnerable to COVID-19. This is why we continue to work with them. We have made direct investments to these communities already. We should do more. We will do more. We are working with the leadership. Minister Miller and others are working directly with communities to make sure that they have the necessary equipment to prevent COVID-19 and to help if there are cases. Mr. Trudeau, you said that your benefit program is not perfect. Why isn't it more simple? Why did you not decide to send a check to everyone and ask for a reimbursement? Why didn't you make it more simple so that people right now would have money and no would fall between the cracks? A lot of people are not eligible for EI. There are many systems that we looked at. We looked at different ways to help people, and we decided that the Canada Emergency Response Benefit was the best way to help millions of people. As we said, we recognize that there are some people who are working only a few hours a week, and they should have access to this benefit, and we are making the necessary changes. We also recognize that there are people in different situations, such as students. They are facing real challenges to find summer employment, to find part-time employment, and they need money to pay their rent and to be able to go back to their studies in the fall. That is why we are always looking at other ways to help. But the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and the wage subsidy together will help out millions and millions of Canadians, of Canadian workers, of people who are going through hard times. We're going to continue to work to help the most vulnerable as well.
That the two measures we've put forward, the wage subsidy and the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, will help millions of Canadians. But at the same time, we also recognize there are people who will not qualify for either and who need help. That's why we've announced certain modifications already. If you're working less than 10 hours a week, we will be telling you how you can apply for the CERB. If you're a student, for example, on top of the Canada Summer Jobs Program that we talked about today, we will be bringing forward more measures because we recognize that without your summer job, without a source of income over the coming months, including part-time work, you will have trouble paying your rent. You will have trouble paying for your tuition next year. So these are the things that we're continuing to work on. We just needed to get the two big measures that would help millions of Canadians out as quickly as possible, and chose to work on refining them later. There is always a fundamental choice to make in a crisis around whether you want to move fast or whether you want to get everything absolutely perfect. In this case, we understood that getting help out to Canadians as quickly as possible in a way that is as solid as possible was extremely important, and we continually work in terms of making sure we're getting people who find themselves in gaps.
Mais vous dites, Monsieur Trudeau, que vous voulez que ça soit rapide.
You say that you want this to be quick. So why is it not more quick for those who are qualified for the CERB and others for the wage subsidy? Is going to take still a few weeks. And so you're going back to the House of Commons. Are you done with working at home? I'm going to continue working at home. I will stay at home for most things. But now, from time to time, for strategic or important meetings, I will go to the Parliament of Canada to work. But generally speaking, I will be working from home.
I will continue to work from home day in and day out, as we're asking most Canadians to do. There will be moments for strategic meetings or particular issues where I will go into the office for meetings, taking all proper precautions, but most of my work will continue to be from home on the telephone.
Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. For the past 2 weeks, you've been saying that the models that Canada will release are coming in the coming days. When will they actually be released?
We've seen over the past few days a number of provinces putting forward more data and more modeling on their issues. At the federal level, we continue every single day to put forward updated numbers to be fully transparent with Canadians on the national picture. But in order to have a national picture in terms of modeling and forecasts, we need to draw on what the provinces are doing, what modeling work they're doing. Provinces have been releasing this week much more information around their models, and as we collate those and look at those and integrate those into a national model, we will have more to say in the coming days.
We recognize that people want to know how long this is going to last and what might be the number of deaths. Each day on the Canada.ca website, we are putting up data in a transparent fashion. We are collating data from throughout the country to have a snapshot of what's happening throughout Canada. We recognize that many provinces this week have shared models, predictive models. If we want to have a national model, we are going to have to collate the models, these predictive models from different provinces. And we will do this in the days to come.
Be in the coming weeks then at this point, and the Conservatives are calling for a daily question period with the return to Parliament. Do you support that?
I think it's extremely important that Parliament continues to do its work, particularly in a time of crisis. It is going to be extremely important that we gather to pass important legislation to allow Canadian businesses and workers to be helped by the wage subsidy. These are things that we're gathering for and working together on. I think that as we asked the Speaker a number of days ago, we should look at gathering a virtual Parliament. I think it's important that parliamentarians from every corner of the country, not just those within driving distance of Ottawa, should be able to weigh in on the working of our democracy. That's why we're looking at virtual models to doing that. In terms of my own engagement, I'm happy to take questions every day, and I'm happy to work with parliamentarians as I take questions every day, as I do here from media. But I'm also happy to work with parliamentarians to make sure that we're continuing to get accountability and get the measures right for Canadians. I believe deeply in our democratic institutions, particularly in a time of crisis, and I look forward to continuing to work with all opposition parties to make sure that we have working systems in place.
We recognize the extent to which it's important to have institutions in a democracy that work well during a crisis. So we are going to adopt a bill at the House of Commons soon to help workers with this wage subsidy. And we've asked the Speaker of the House of Commons to look at different ways that we could meet virtually. It seems to me a little bit unfair that only the parliamentarians who are able to come to Ottawa, who live close to Ottawa, are able to participate in our institution of the House of Commons. We would like to create virtual options so that all MPs can participate. We're going to continue our discussions with other parties. I'm very pleased to take questions from the media each and every day, and I'm also open to take questions regularly from other parties. We're going to continue discussions on this.
I know you're going to be talking about your modeling in the coming days, but from what you've seen, do you have any idea when the virus is going to peak nationally? And also, are you concerned about the virus coming in waves that Canadians are going to be dealing with for many months?
Excellent question, Tom. I think we are very much trying to figure out where we are on the curve within the various models. What is very, very clear is there are significant differences across the country in where various provinces are on their own curves. Overall, as a country, I can say we have reached the point where we are later than many other countries. So we have a glimpse into what is effective and what is working to bend those curves in other countries that we are doing now. Our social distancing over the past weeks and staying at home has been very effective, and regardless of the model in place, it is clear that the best outcomes come when there is maximal social distancing, as we are pretty close to doing right now, as we ramp up testing, because that's an important piece of it, and we're continuing to do more testing every single day, and as we do aggressive contact tracing to ensure that people who are possibly exposed are put into self-isolation. These kinds of things are what give us the best chance of getting there. We don't know exactly when we're going to be peaking, but we do know if we continue to do this, if we continue to keep the measures in place that we have right now, we will get through this much, much quicker. Once we are through this initial phase, we will then be in a mode until there is a vaccine, which could take many, many months, if not more than a year, to get to. We will be calibrating very carefully our behaviors as a country, as a society, as an economy, to managing the existence and persistence of COVID-19. Better testing, careful isolation of vulnerable communities, measures of gradually bringing back the economy will come. So if there are spikes, as the data and documentation tells us that we can expect, we are quickly able to adjust and react. So none of those spikes over the coming many months that are possible will be anything as serious as this one. But in order to do that, we have to keep following medical advice, knowing that what Canadians are doing right now, staying home, keeping 2 meters apart, not going out unless you absolutely have to, is what is getting us through this and will ensure that, that Canadians are kept as safe as possible and our economy comes back as quickly and as strongly as possible. So let's keep doing what we're doing. Just sur quel aspect? Le pic, oui.
Speaking about the spike, yes, we know that the measures that we are implementing right now are the correct measures. We've seen this with other countries who are ahead of us. We know that these measures are the best way to reduce the impact and the time that this pandemic lasts. We will continue with the measures that we have in place right now. We don't know exactly when we will have a spike in cases. We know that we will have a peak, and in the months and in the year to come, it is possible that after we go through this phase of the virus, we will have a resurgence of cases in Canada. from time to time. I hope that we will have measures in place to better control these and also to reduce the impact of these spikes in cases in some places. This is why we're working together. We're going to share our models in years to come, in months to come.
Of testing for these models and numbers we're talking about, are you at all concerned that Canada's most populous province is the lowest per capita rate in terms of testing, but also, according to reports, is falling well short of Ontario's own testing goals? So what more can the federal government do? Why hasn't the federal government stepped in to increase testing in Ontario and in other provinces?
We're working very closely with all provincial health authorities to ensure that they have the equipment and the ability to do as many tests as possible. This is an essential part of getting through this phase of the pandemic and indeed keeping us out of further phase or minimizing further phases of the pandemic over the coming many months. We continually do more testing every single day in this country. We're already doing better than many countries in the world that we compare ourselves to. But at the same time, we recognize there's more to do. We will continue to work with jurisdictions that are facing challenges, and we will work together to make sure that we're doing what is needed right across the country to keep Canadians safe.
Prime Minister Janet Silver, Global News. Public Health Canada told the government in early February more resources for local public health officials were needed to contain the outbreak and enforce a quarantine order. Why did the federal government not act at that time to do more to bolster resources and to stop the spread?
We recognized early on that this was a challenge, and we did take many measures to try and control or prevent or ensure that Canada was less vulnerable to the spread of COVID-19 that we were seeing elsewhere in the world. With hindsight, I'm sure there are lots of things that we would have done differently, could have done differently, but I can tell you that every step of the way, we took the advice of our medical professionals and our public health experts seriously and did as best as we could. Obviously, once this is all through, there will be many people reflecting on different countries' responses and what we need to do to ensure that we are even better prepared next time. It was something we certainly did and benefited from because of the SARS outbreak of 2003 that allowed us to have a number of measures in place that were more effective than some other countries. But at the same time, there's always more to learn and more to do.
And an Ipsos poll is out today for Global News that shows 1/4 of Canadians report they are still not strictly following physical distancing. And cities are also logging thousands of complaints from residents about people flouting the rules. I'm just wondering, do you have any tools that you're willing to use to crack down on these people?
I think one of the things that we have to recognize in this situation is that much of the ability of Canada and of Canadians to get through this in as short amount of time as possible and as healthy as possible requires citizens to be doing their part. And we see millions upon millions of Canadians following the instructions of Health Canada officials, of their public health officials, in terms of social distancing, in terms of staying at home, in terms of not going out unless they actually have to, absolutely have to, of doing everything they can to keep our frontline workers from grocery store cashiers to surgeons as safe as we possibly can. These are the things that Canadians are doing. Unfortunately, we do see that there are some people who are not choosing to follow these instructions, and they're putting everyone else at risk. And we continue to impress upon everyone that we need to do what is necessary to get through this as quickly and as safely as possible. We will continually work with jurisdictions, with cities, with provinces on new measures or extra measures that they feel are necessary. As it goes, we're continually monitoring what is needed and what we might need to do as next steps. Merci tout le monde. Bonne journée.